For those of you who don't know who I'm talking to, we have Canadian comedy icon Mark Breslin, who is the founder of Yuk Yuk's and has launched a career of, dare I say, hundreds of stand-up comics over the years. And I don't know if you've done a lot of stand-up yourself, but
20 years worth.
You've certainly been on the production end, and you mentioned the incredible Joan Rivers. You actually were the producer of her TV show, I believe.
Yeah, and it was I got it by complete surprise. I certainly wasn't on any list that anybody at Fox went through. I think it was kind of maybe even a desperation move on her part, because everybody was so connected with NBC and nobody wanted to alienate Johnny Carson. But I was from another place, and Johnny Carson wasn't going to hurt or help my career. So I certainly took the job, flew down to California, loved it, stayed there for 2 years. When the job ended, I came back. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. When the job ended, they gave me such a big check that I thought, what am I going to do with this? And I decided I'm going to move to Hawaii for 6 months. And that's exactly what I did. And then I came home.
So Joan has this reputation of being this, very caustic stand-up.
My parents hated me, okay? We're all going to hear the story, aren't we? My parents hated me too. My parents, all I ever heard growing up is, why can't you be like your cousin Sheila? Why can't you be like your cousin Sheila? Sheila had died at birth. They just hated me.
But I've also heard and read a little bit that she was just the nicest person off screen, much like Don Rickles.
This is
had
true.
That persona.
Sure, this is true for so many comics. The comics who are mean on stage are generally very nice people, and the term is embracing their Jungian opposite. And similarly, there's some really nice stand-ups on stage that are complete and total jerks off stage. But Joan was really nice. And you know how you can tell if a performer is nice is how they treat their writers. Because I had a friend who was working for Johnny Carson, and I said, so what's he like? He'd been working for him for 14 years writing. He said, I don't know. I've never really met him. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we have a head writer. The head writer meets with the star, but we don't. We just sit in our room and come up with jokes. But that was not true for Joan. Joan would rather sit in a room with a bunch of writers than sit in a room with a bunch of network executives, I assure you. She was a creative through and through.
Yeah. I was told, or I read, that Carson was like the most introverted person around. That he got up on stage was pretty amazing.
I didn't really know him very well, so I can't really comment on that.
Okay. Fair enough. So would you mind taking us back a little bit to how you found comedy and found yourself wanting to have a career in comedy?
Sure. Well, these days, doing comedy is a career option, but that was not the case 47 years ago when I first started out. I had graduated with a degree in English literature and had poked around a lot of corners of radical organizations and radical psychology movements. I was a real seeker at the time, and got a job in a place called Harbourfront in Toronto, which was the first. I was part of the first team to develop it, and I got very attached to the talent. And the talent that I liked the best were the comics. The comics, I noticed, were one of two groups. Either they were doing really old style stuff, and they were older, or they were these new young comics who were doing comedy that was relevant. This was 1974, 1975. They were doing new kind of comedy that was very relevant, really personal, completely uncensored. And these people, I fell in love with this. So I started hosting a comedy night at Harbourfront, and the thing went through the roof. And then, as well as things were going, we all got fired from Harbourfront, and now nobody had a place to play. Oh yeah, there were places to play, but you were told what to say and you were told what to do, and there
Hmm.
were white tablecloths and old waiters, that kind of thing. It was not what
Yeah.
the sort of punk rock and roll idea that I had, where anything went, and the more
Hmm.
offensive the better. So I stumbled on a community center that
Hmm.
was doing some folk music on Saturdays, and I went and I asked them if I could have another night to do comedy. They said, yeah, Wednesdays. Always the worst day in the week for show business.
Hmm.
And we started the club, called it Yuk Yuk's, one night a week, and it kind of went through the roof. So 2 years later, I raised the money to open up the first full-time Yuk Yuk's in Toronto, 200 seats, 6 shows a week, 7 shows a week, and it was very successful. Then we started to branch out and open up more clubs.
Hmm. So you're, I believe, the most successful comedy franchise in the world, are you not? Like,
I believe so. The improvs in the States are pretty big as well, but COVID really did a number on them, and they lost a lot of their clubs, or a lot of their
hmm.
clubs kept the name, but they wouldn't let head office book them. They have their own websites, but we're certainly the biggest consolidated comedy company in the world.
Hmm. So do the comedians actually work for Yuk Yuk's or for you, or are they
Well, they're
all?
independent. They're independent contractors, but we have a
Mhm.
roster of people that we work with and sign, so they follow our protocols, and we
Mhm.
have about 100, roughly 100 people signed to us all across the country, of which I would say 65% are in Toronto.
Okay. So how this might be a difficult question, but do you have like a Mount Rushmore of comedians from, the various eras from, when you started off? Because the modern comedians are very different than, when you were starting out.
Sure. Um, well, in the very beginning, there was Larry Horowitz, who was
Hmm.
kind of the most commercial act to come along and kind of prove to us that what we were doing didn't have to be an underground thing that only, really odd people liked. So there was Larry
Hmm.
Horowitz. There was a guy named Paul Mandel, who was his polar opposite, who would go
Hmm.
on stage and read his divorce papers, cry, and throw sticky buns at the audience. And he
That's
was
funny.
magnificent too. He was magnificent too. Um, Later on, when we opened up full time, Howie
Hmm.
Mandel showed up, came to us, and developed his act there. He'll tell you
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
And Jim Carrey as well. Um,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
just
Minor league players.
Sorry, no, they're not minor league players.
Yeah.
Mike McDonald,
Uh
who I
huh.
think probably pound for pound is the best comic to ever come out of a stand-up comic to ever come out of Canada, and most
Hmm.
people would agree with that. Unfortunately, he died 2 years ago. Um, Maybe you didn't know that.
I didn't know that. I know
He
Norm
had he
Macdonald
he had had a
passed.
kidney transplant, and
Okay.
they don't go well usually.
Yeah.
It's You're on borrowed time with a kidney transplant. But he was magnificent, and I was the first person to book people like Sam Kinison, Seinfeld,
Oh
uh,
wow.
Andrew Dice Clay,
Hmm.
all of these people. They couldn't really get hired in the States at that time. Oh well,
Hmm.
Seinfeld probably could, but some of
Yeah.
the other ones could not. And
Hmm.
we took great pride in presenting people that hadn't quite made it onto the list yet in the US.
Yeah. I think Kinnison is one. If the younger people watching or listening haven't seen Kinnison, it's as unique a comedy set as you'll ever see. I mean, he was just bonkers.
Well, the story about Kinnison and I, because he lived with me for a while. Um,
Okay,
that was
I
a
wasn't
trip.
expecting that story.
I'll predate the story.
Hmm.
What I used to do was I used to go down to New York and Los Angeles and look for headliners I could book. And
Hmm.
remember, the scene then in like 1980 or so was very slim. There were only 3 or 4 clubs all over North America. The boom
Hmm.
hadn't quite happened yet. So I needed headliners. I couldn't depend on Canadians, even though my goal always was to hire Canadians first. And I'm glad to say that these days, all the clubs across the country book about 92% Canadian comics, which is great. So anyway, I went down to the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, where I often would go down to look for acts, and they would put on their inventory for me, 12 or 14 acts, and I'd sit there and I'd sip my tea, and they would all go on. And then at the very end, one of these trips, a person from the Comedy Store came to me and said, well, that's the end of the showcase, but we put this other guy on at the end to clear the room so that the waitresses can go home. They said, so you can get up, you can leave now, and you've kind of seen everything. I said, I don't want to leave when the guy's going up. It's only one guy, and it was Kinison, and he was brilliant. Brilliant. I could see the brilliance right away. And then the people from the Comedy Store said, well, who'd you like tonight? And I said, the last guy. And they said, yeah, he's really good. His airplane food jokes are terrific. I said, no, not that last guy, the actual last guy. And they said, you want to hire Sam Kinison?
I'm reading this, and it's an exciting story, but I read it and I thought, I know Jesus was never married. Guy never had a wife. No, he was never married, because no wife would buy this story in 100 years. The disciples will, the believers will. No wife would buy this fucking story. Good luck. Good luck with this story. First of all, he leaves on Friday afternoon with 12 other guys. He's gone for 3 days. No message, no way to get in touch with her. He comes home Monday afternoon looking like he hasn't slept. And seems like he's partied out, man. And Mrs. Jesus is just waiting, going, oh, okay, I guess it's day 3 of this show. Oh, great. Well, I'm glad you could find your way home, Savior. Where's your 12 friends who won't get a job? How were they? Yeah, disciples, my ass. They're losers. Every one of them are using it. You're not even smart enough to know it. Anybody says, I believe, we put them up and feed them. I'm sick of it. Where are you at? Jesus is going, I don't need this shit. Not after what I went through this weekend. No, honey, I'll tell you where I've been. Come here. Come here. Come here. I'll tell you where I've been. First of all, not that it ruined your weekend any, but I was dead!
I said, yeah, we'll fly him in. And we did that. And he completely and totally bombed. Bombed worse than anybody we've ever booked on that show, because he hadn't quite gotten it together yet. It was a work in progress, clearly. So you started on the Wednesday. His Wednesday went all right. Then the Thursday came along. The club was quite busy, and he walked everybody. Every single person in the audience left. That's unprecedented. Wow. So I walked backstage, and I took out my wallet, and I took out $100. And he probably thought I was going to give him the 100 and say, go home. Instead, what I said was, Sam, this is a bonus for you tonight. $100 for walking the entire audience. And every show you do this week where you walk the entire audience, I will give you a bonus of $100. But you have to walk the entire audience for that to happen. He was stupefied, because that was the last thing he would ever think a club owner would do. But he didn't walk the audience for the rest of the week, but he didn't do well. But I believed in him totally. And 8 months later, I brought him in again, and he did better. And then, about 8 months later after that, he'd figured out how to do his act, and he just blew the roof off the place. And we stayed friends right to the end, right until he tragically died.
Yeah. I wrote a memoir about this crazy medical journey I've been on. And I write a little bit about him and the tragic way he passed away, because they said he had a near-death experience in that accident. But just a fascinating guy who came from, a very religious family, and then just went off the path, or their path, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. He was a circuit preacher before he was a comic, and he played me a tape of himself doing preaching.
Mhm.
And it was exactly the same as his act, except there
Mhm.
were no jokes in it. But the rhythms, the cadences were
Yeah.
just the same. It was very interesting.
Mhm. And I think he was quite a good singer as well.
Yeah,
I had read
he
somewhere.
released a couple of singles. I mean, he did that Wild Thing version, and he did something else on the I think it was on the Letterman show. Um,
Mhm.
I can't remember what song it was. Oh, well, it was an Elvis Presley. I can't help falling in love with you. He
Yeah.
sang that, but with a
Yeah.
break that was completely unlike what Elvis would have said in the break in
Mhm.
that song.
Mhm. So who else are some of your favorites from maybe that beginning era that,
Well,
really caused the
there's
stand-up scene to explode?
there's certainly Norm Macdonald is worth talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
he was from Ottawa, as a number of comics have been from Ottawa, including Mike Macdonald. But
Mhm.
Norm, the first time he went on, and this story is courtesy of my nephew, who's the manager there and has been for 30 years.
Mhm.
Um, he went on an amateur night, did very well, walked off, and as he passed my nephew Howie, said to him, "Well, I guess they'll never be seeing me again." So Howie ran after him and said, "What were you talking about?" He said, "Well, I know I bombed. You don't have to be nice about it. Don't worry."
Mhm.
He said, "No, no, you were great. In fact, I want you back next week and the week after that, and I want to get you on the circuit." And well, the
Mhm.
rest is great. By the way,
Mhm.
Norm tells the story of the Sam Kinison $100
Mhm.
bonus in his book, but he gets it wrong because he said I whipped out $1,000. Hey,
Okay.
I never carried $1,000 in cash in my life. It was
Mhm.
$100, not $1,000.
Yeah. To me, Norm had the most unique way of telling a joke because he would take you off in directions you weren't expecting to go, and then weave it all back to some place that made perfect sense in the frame of the joke, but you just weren't expecting it.
Yeah, he was a master, and certainly I think his stuff on Saturday Night Live was absolutely great.
Mhm. I don't know. Would they allow him on Saturday Night Live in this current environment of politically correct?
Well, remember that there are producers there who can say this is fine, this is not fine. They try to go as close to the edge as possible without going over. But the flashpoint these days is no longer. It's certainly not politics, and it's certainly not even sex, but it's race. Race is the
Mhm.
flashpoint for political correctness, and there's not an awful lot on Saturday Night Live that deals with race anyway.
Mhm.
So yes, I think he could have his. The only reason he lost his job was that Lorne Michaels was not producing the show that year. It was another guy with no real experience in comedy, and he was
Mhm.
good friends with OJ. This guy,
Mhm.
Don Ohlmeyer, I think was his name. Came from a sports background, and
Yeah.
if you remember Norm's opening joke after the trial, which is, "This just in: murder is now legal in California." And like nobody could have done it better than Norm.
Yeah.
And he got fired for that. He
So
did not get
you
fired for being politically incorrect.
mhm. You'd mentioned the writers when we were talking before. Um, how much of their own material do stand-ups write? Like I imagine people like Seinfeld, they're so established they might have a team. But when you're starting off like a Norm Macdonald or you're on Saturday Night Live, how much is that actually Norm and how much was that, part of the writing crew?
Well, Saturday Night Live might have been, there's a writing crew there, but the
Mhm.
spine of it is usually written by whoever's doing the weekend update. And you
Mhm.
know that because the people who are doing weekend update frequently are doing nothing else on the show. So that's their
Ah,
responsibility. Now, if you're
okay.
asking the larger question of, when you see a comic on stage, how much of that act did he write and how much
Mhm.
did somebody else write for him? And these days, it's like 95% written by the person who's performing, because what you're looking for now is an authenticity of experience. You can't borrow experience and write jokes for people. Although, you know, in certain cases, like if somebody approached Stephen Wright with a great joke in the Stephen Wright style, I'm sure he'd buy it and use it. But that becomes much more difficult when you're a storytelling comic.
Yeah. There was just something that came out a few weeks ago about a comedian that had based his act on a whole bunch of racial things that had happened to him, and it turns out they actually didn't. I don't know if you've heard this.
No, I don't know this story.
Okay, I think he was an Indian comic. Anyhow, it's
I don't know the story.
You go back to this authenticity, and yeah, he's just crushed. So, it's really hard to tell a joke in my experience. You know, some of the old Jewish crowd, they could tell a joke. Buddy Hackett could tell a joke, I think, like nobody else.
But he does get a lot of young girls, which brings us back to the guy 80 and the girl 22 who fell in love with him and wanted to marry him. He said, I could not give you enough sexual action. I have the appetite, but not the equipment. She said, nowadays, they are installing metal pieces in the penis. He goes with her to the, what do you call that guy, urologist, and talks to him about having an implant, a penile implant, which means a stick in your dick. So the penile implanter said, not only do we have the little pump and also the rod, we have a new thing now. We take the trunk of a baby elephant.
But I think we've gone more to a storytelling type of humor these days. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Look, I did stand up for 20 years, but if I were at a party and somebody said, tell me a joke, I don't think I would do it very well. Because the difference has gone from jokes to somebody's character. I'm sure you've heard the saying that, you know, all comedy is character. It starts with character. And so does stand up. And the trick in stand up, in fact, is to find that character in such a way that you can express it, that the audience knows what you're thinking before you even say anything. And a good example of that is Jack Benny using his, you know, face, touching his face and looking kind of bereft, where you just know what he's feeling and thinking without him even having to say something. Another person who's great at that is Jeremy Hotz, who also started at Yuk Yuk's. Do you not know Jeremy?
No, I'm not familiar with him.
Oh, he's wonderful, just wonderful. He has an aggrieved look. Says everything is shit, everything is poo, everything is horrible. Really funny, very funny. He lives in Los Angeles now, but he's originally from Ottawa.
Okay, another Ottawa connection.
Yes. So. Another person that started at Yuck's, of course, that not from the very beginning days, but midway through, was Russell Peters, who has grown into one of the strongest acts in the world.
And you, bro, you're Indian? Yeah, I could see that. I have eyes. I'm glad you're here. He's having a problem with his laptop. And
so is it even possible to get somebody like Russell in the clubs anymore now that they're playing like these big theaters and things like that? Did they ever go back to the clubs?
Only if they want to feel like a big shot and drop in in an unadvertised way. But other than that, you know, he would make so much money from an appearance at the Air Canada Centre. Why would he have to do 4 nights in a club unless he's trying to ready some kind of special? Sometimes they'll do that, but it's rare. It's very rare. And, you know, people like him live in Los Angeles now, so he's more likely to use an American club for that rather than fly all the way into Toronto.
So I've often had a theory about, you know, professional athletes. Like they have a best before day until, you know, they go from that superstar to slightly less, and they get on the downside for the most part. And I find that's the same with musical artists. Do you find that's the same with comedians? They become so successful they lose touch with what gave them their edge.
Some do, some don't.
Mhm.
Comedy, stand-up comedy is one of the few things you can do into your 90s.
Mhm.
And I had the pleasure of working with George Burns
Oh wow.
for a comedy festival I was producing in Toronto, and we had him at the Sony Center, which is it was called the O'Keefe Center, I think, at that time. It's 3,200 seats, and of
Mhm.
course it's sold out. And he's in the basement in the green room, waiting to go on, sitting there smoking a cigar. And I
Mhm.
walk in, I introduce myself, and I said, "Don't get up, don't get up." And he said, "I can't."
That's amazing.
So yeah, so you can be very old. Milton Berle performed until he was really old. Um,
Hmm.
there are a lot of things that can take people out of the game, including suicide, which is the number one killer of comics under 50. But suicide, drugs,
Hmm.
gun violence, all kinds of stuff can happen. Some people, unfortunately got cancer really early. I'm thinking of Bill
Hmm.
Hicks here. He was like 42 and he had prostate
Hmm.
cancer. No, not prostate cancer. The other cancer that's really bad, the one that Steve Jobs had.
Okay.
Uh,
Uh,
wh-
Brain cancer.
nope, no, it's in your torso. Um,
Okay.
I guess, sorry, I'll remember it. At any rate,
Yeah.
he was gone in 6 weeks from the
Hmm.
diagnosis. So, sometimes things like that happen too. But it is an art form where if you keep kind of current, there'll
Hmm.
always be an audience for you. Now, as you age, you'll tend to do more corporate work, and may do the
Uh-huh.
cruise ships. I have lots of friends that I worked with in the early 80s in clubs that all gravitated to cruise ships, and the
Hmm.
money's great. You only have to do one show a week. I
Hmm.
believe you can bring your wife,
Hmm.
and it becomes kind of a working holiday. So if you can get the right tone, because it's kind of conservative on the cruise ships,
Right.
you're working towards, you're working for all kinds of people.
Hmm.
But if you can get the tone right, you can get in that world and you can be there for 20 years.
Hmm. I have to admit, not knowing how things work behind the scenes, I didn't really like Jay Leno as the host of the Tonight Show. But as he's post career, and I see him on podcasts and in other venues. The guy is just really, really funny, and I realized he had to play a certain role to have that job, and
Jay
his
is
stand up.
Jay is one of the best stand-ups anywhere and always has been. We had him at Yuk Yuk's around 1988 and 1981. He hadn't quite made it yet, but we
Mhm.
had him there for 2 nights and he was brilliant. He is a very, very good stand-up.
Mhm.
Always
Yeah.
was, always will be. But here's something you may not know about him. When he had the show, the nightly show,
Mhm.
every Sunday he would go to the Comedy Magic store club in Hermosa Beach, which is a beach town in
Okay.
Los Angeles, and
Mhm.
run a set.
Huh.
He would
You'd
keep
think he'd
working as
have
a
the
stand-up.
energy.
Yeah, he would keep working on his set because um, a lot of weekends, Leno would finish up at the Tonight Show, get on a plane, and go to some place and do stand up in a big theater for a night or two. Then come right back
Mhm.
to Los Angeles and do the club again. He's got an amazing work ethic,
Mhm. And he's funny as hell.
and
So
he is really funny.
yeah. So I've read a book. I think it was about the history of the comic store, and then there was a documentary about it as well.
Yeah, Mike
And
Binder. Mike Binder did the documentary. It's 6 parts. It's
yeah,
very good.
yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. But it seems there's an insecurity about stand up, that a lot of the stand ups think they have to get onto TV and get that regular TV show gig or something to sort of maybe get the regular income or to legitimize themselves or something like that. Is that something you've seen as well?
Well, I've seen it, but I've also seen it kind of become less important with the rise of podcasts, social media, web, web comedy, what do you call it? YouTube stuff, which is all distributed, kind of in an ad hoc basis. But there are comics now who can sell out big theaters, like 2,500 seat theaters. They've never been on television. They've never been on television. It's all people passing on clips that grow an audience. And there's actually people who are, Just for Laughs was just in town. They booked a whole bunch of headliners, and there were actually a couple of headliners I'd never even heard of, because I don't sit there every day and go on the web, because I'm a bit old for that. I don't do that. I use the web for research or email, but I don't use it for entertainment. I'm still old fashioned. I go to movies and I watch TV. But I didn't even know who some of them were, and I'm not ashamed to admit it.
So do you remember who a couple of those were?
No.
Like maybe Andrew Schulz.
I knew about Andrew Schulz because he was originally from Toronto, and was
really
long ago. And he'd done Yuk Yuk's a couple of times on amateur night. This time, while he was in town, he came by both weekend nights to do sets at Yuk's, which was great. Yeah, he was terrific.
He does some of the best crowd work I've seen.
Yeah, and he's a good example of somebody who doesn't have a television series, right? Has no movie career, and kind of just got where he is by word of mouth or word of click.
Yeah, I guess so. So can we go back to maybe your Mount Rushmore? Who would be on your current Mount Rushmore of stand-ups?
Well, that's a tough question, but depends how far back we're going. Are we going back as far as Mort Saul?
Oh, I don't even know if anybody would remember who he is, but
which is sad because Mort Saul, more than Lenny Bruce, Mort Saul created modern stand-up. He was really the first, and I'm very honored to say I was a friend of his. And he was a very, very interesting guy. But he'd be on my Mount Rushmore. Of course, so would Lenny Bruce. So would George Carlin. So would Richard Pryor. So would Joan Rivers. There's some more modern people who have. Oh, so would Seinfeld, of course. Robert Klein would be up there on that. And I'm going to see him in Toronto and sometime in November. He's coming to Toronto. I'm going to see him. I'm going to watch him. I worked with him. He hosted a show I did for Massey Hall on New Year's Eve a couple of years ago. But I think those are kind of the people I would have on that. And I'm sure people are listening to this and going, no, you left out so-and-so. You left out so, and the only reason I left them out is because I just didn't think of them. If you gave me a couple of days to make a list, I would be able to have a better list for you. But that's my off the top of my head list.
Okay. So maybe I'll ring you up in a couple of days and we'll go through an extended list. So,
no, let's keep the list we have.
Okay. How do you feel about some of these comedians that have sort of fallen from grace because people found out about their personal lives? Like Bill Cosby or people like that.
You know what's so cool about Jell-O gelatin pops? They taste just like Jell-O gelatin. But they've got a handle. So, while your right hand is doing this, your left hand can be doing this or, But if your left hand sees how much fun your right hand is having, it won't want to be left out. Okay, now you have to share.
Okay, so when you say Bill Cosby or people like that, it assumes that the transgressions of all the comics are like Bill Cosby's, and it seems that nobody's is like Bill Cosby's. There's a very good documentary series that W. Bell, I think, did, I think called "We Have to Talk About Cosby," and he deals with the fact that he deals with the issue that, you know, here is this kind of rapist that at the same time was doing amazing things for charity and amazing things for the Black community and amazing things, and it's just a conundrum. I personally, unless somebody does something at that, you know, level, I personally don't care about somebody's personal life. When I hire them, I'm not hiring the nicest people. I'm hiring the best comics. And, you know, there's a big difference to me between Louis C.K., for instance, and Bill Cosby. So I did hire Louis C.K. after the scandal. I believe I was the first ever to do that. And I didn't get that much blowback from it from the general public, which proved to me that this was trumped up and people didn't really think what he did was all that bad. But if I tried to book Bill Cosby, I think there would be such a public outcry, and I think it would really hurt my business. Yeah.
And Louis is tremendously funny.
Tremendously funny. It's tremendously funny.
Just has a unique take on, maybe that's, you know, because he's Mexican. And
what?
Yeah,
Louis
he is actually Mexican.
What?
I think his mother's Mexican.
I don't know about this at all. I thought he was Hungarian.
Oh, could be both. I don't know. I'll have to double
that's
check.
That's possible too. CK stands for some unpronounceable Hungarian word.
Okay.
That's why he changed it to CK, because I think it's Sexzelli, SZ. I can't remember, but
you know, and Gabriel Iglesias, also tremendously funny, very, very unique.
Yeah, so. Yeah, like him too.
So we're running a little short on time. More on the production end of things. What's allowed you to stay ahead of the curve when, you know, so many other comedy clubs and chains have just not been able to make it?
Well, first of all, from a business perspective, we're a franchise company, which means all our places are franchises. They have to follow a very, very strict set of rules, which is outlined in a book, which is about 2 inches thick, that they get when we approve them to do a franchise. But that means if one of them has a problem and is failing, it doesn't affect the others. So that's a big thing. The second thing is that we integrated a talent agency with our clubs, which gives us a lot of strength in the marketplace. So that's also a big thing. The third thing is, I think, unlike most comedy clubs, we really created a brand, and the brand sort of means something. It's got a kind of anti-establishment sort of feel to it, and you know, anything could happen here. And I think that really appeals to a definite segment of the market. So I think those things are what made Yuk Yuk survive, because we had a really tough time coming out of COVID. You know, the clubs were closed for pretty much 2 years across the country. Hard to come back from that. Yeah, but we did.
For sure. But you did. And
we did.
I think, you know, stand-up comedy and rebel musicians, more of the punk rock, you know, we don't give a shit kind of thing anymore, are going to be what helps us get through, you know, this post-COVID era and get people being innovative and creative and making the world a better place again.
Well, of course, that'd be great. And I'm hoping that's what happens. But we're still in expansion mode. We're opening a new club in London, Ontario, in 3 weeks, it's a month roughly. So that's great. We opened up in Winnipeg this year, where we hadn't been in 25 years.
Yeah, I grew up in Winnipeg, so Winnipeg.
Okay. So we're in the Fort Garry Hotel there, which has been completely renovated and is beautiful now.
So there was a couple of clubs that I remember. One, I don't know if any exist anymore. It's been a while.
What, in Winnipeg?
Yeah.
There's Rumors.
Still, okay.
Yeah, Rumors is still there. Rumors still does well. Rumors is out in a suburb. We're downtown. So I think there's a market for both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There was actually a city councilor owned a club for a while.
That was Rumors. That's you're thinking of Sam Katz.
No, it was before Sam.
Oh, okay.
And I actually saw Larry Miller there.
Yeah.
Who's also
Larry was
really
there.
good.
Always very funny. I think he's retired now.
Okay. Well, he looked like he should have been retired when he was performing, because he's just got one of those, I look really old, but I'm not looks.
Right.
So.
No, he always looked old, actually.
Mm-hmm. But he was great. So, Mark, I'm getting the 1 minute warning here. So
okay.
I just want to say thank you. This has been fascinating, and I really enjoyed it. And I hope the audience has enjoyed it. And,
you're welcome.
Anything you want to close with?
No, but good luck with your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Very much appreciated. To all the listeners in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And please like, subscribe, hit the whatever buttons they tell you to hit these days, and have yourselves a great week. Thanks, Mark. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye.